The text came at 2 in the morning. Need to see you. Now. Can't carry this alone anymore. If you ever gave a shit about our brotherhood, come to my place. Carter Reynolds. My squad mate from Iraq. The guy who'd saved my life in Mosul, and who I hadn't seen in 3 years because we'd both been avoiding each other. Avoiding the memories, avoiding the truth about our last deployment. I sat up in bed, staring at my phone, my wife stirring beside me. Carter and I had an unspoken agreement. We didn't contact each other. We didn't reminisce. We didn't acknowledge that we'd served together. Because acknowledging that meant acknowledging other things. Things we'd sworn never to discuss. But the text felt different, desperate. Like someone on the edge of something irreversible. I texted back, be there in 20. My wife mumbled something as I dressed. I told her a friend needed help, which was true. I didn't tell her it was Carter, didn't mention Iraq, didn't explain why my hands were shaking as I pulled on my jacket. Carter lived in a basement apartment in a rough part of town. The kind of place you end up when you're barely holding your life together. I knocked, and he opened the door immediately, like he'd been standing there waiting. He looked terrible, gaunt, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed and wild. The apartment behind him was a disaster. Empty bottles, takeout containers, the smell of stale cigarettes and despair. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice hoarse. Wasn't sure you would. What's going on, Carter? You look like hell. I am in hell. Have been for 7 years. But it's getting worse. I can't keep carrying this. Can't keep pretending it didn't happen. He gestured me inside. I sat on his worn couch while he paced, unable to stay still, energy radiating off him like electricity. You know what today is? He asked. I did. October 17th. Our last night in Mosul before redeploying home, 7 years ago to the day. I remember, I said quietly. Do you really remember what happened that night? Or have you convinced yourself it was something else, something less terrible than what it actually was? I felt my chest tighten. Carter, we agreed never to talk about this. Fuck what we agreed. His voice rose. 6 of us made that agreement. You know how many are still alive? 3. Jackson killed himself 2 years ago. Martinez died in a car crash that wasn't a fucking accident. Williams drank himself to death last year. Half our squad is dead, and you and Torres and I are barely hanging on, and you want to talk about agreements? He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen counter, took a long drink straight from it. I can't do it anymore, Jason. Can't keep pretending I'm fine. Can't keep lying to myself about what we did. So I'm going to tell you what really happened that night. And you're going to listen. And then we're going to decide together what the fuck we're supposed to do with the truth. I wanted to leave. Wanted to walk out that door and drive home and crawl back into bed and forget this conversation was happening. But Carter was my brother. We'd fought together, bled together, survived together. And he was clearly drowning. All right, I said, tell me what you remember. Carter sat down heavily in a chair across from me, the whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. Our last night in Mosul before rotating home. We were supposed to be standing down, final equipment checks, administrative bullshit. But Lieutenant Morrison got a tip about a high-value target hiding in the industrial district. Said we had a chance to nail a major ISIS cell leader before we left. I remembered. Morrison had been eager to end our deployment with one last significant operation. One last feather in his cap. He asked for volunteers. You, me, Jackson, Martinez, Williams, and Torres. 6 guys for a quick hit on a suspected terrorist safe house. In and out, Morrison said. Probably wouldn't even make contact. Just secure the target if he was there, call it in, let the next unit handle the follow-up. We rolled out at 2100 hours, Carter continued, his eyes distant. Morrison had coordinates for a building in a bombed-out industrial area. 3-story structure, mostly intact despite the fighting. Intel said the target and maybe 4 bodyguards were holed up on the top floor. We approached on foot. Standard clearing procedures. You and Jackson took point. Torres and Martinez covered the exits. Williams and I followed Morrison inside. Building was dark, mostly empty. Signs of recent occupation but nobody visible on the first 2 floors. Carter took another drink, his hand trembling. Then we heard movement on the 3rd floor. Morrison signaled for silence. We crept up the stairs. And that's when everything went to shit. I knew what was coming. Had spent 7 years trying not to think about what was coming. The 3rd floor had been converted into living quarters. Makeshift walls dividing the space into rooms. Morrison pointed to the largest room. Light was visible under the door. We could hear voices inside. Male voices speaking Arabic. Morrison gave the signal to breach. You and Jackson hit the door. Flashbangs. We stormed in ready for hostiles. Carter's voice dropped to barely a whisper. There were 11 people in that room, Jason. 11. The intel said 5 maximum. And they weren't all men. They weren't all fighters. There were women. Children. My stomach churned. This was the part I'd spent 7 years repressing, rewriting, trying to forget. We were already committed to the breach. Already had weapons up. Already had targets acquired. And Morrison started shouting, "Engage, engage," because he saw armed men reaching for weapons. So we engaged, all of us. We opened fire on a room full of people who'd had maybe 2 seconds to register what was happening. We shot anything that moved. We shot people trying to surrender. We shot people trying to shield others with their bodies. Carter was crying now, tears streaming down his face. It was over in maybe 15 seconds. 11 people dead, and when the smoke cleared, when our ears stopped ringing from the gunfire, we saw what we'd done. There were 3 men with weapons, legitimate targets, probably ISIS fighters. But the other 8? His voice broke completely. 4 women, 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, the oldest maybe 12, and 1 elderly man who'd been unarmed, just caught in the crossfire. I felt bile rising in my throat. I'd buried this memory so deep, convinced myself it had been different, that everyone in that room had been hostile. Morrison immediately got on the radio, called it in as a successful engagement, said we'd neutralized the target and several combatants, requested exfil and evidence collection, made it sound clean, professional, by the book. And then he turned to us, to the 6 of us standing in that room with 11 bodies at our feet, and he said we had 2 choices. We could report what really happened, that we'd massacred a family along with 3 ISIS fighters, and face investigations, court-martials, possibly prison. Or we could corroborate his version, say everyone in the room had been armed, say it was a clean engagement, say it was justified. What did we say, I asked, though I knew the answer. We said what he wanted us to say, because we were scared, because we were 24 years old and didn't want to go to prison, because Morrison was our commanding officer and we'd been trained to follow orders, because it was easier to lie than to face what we'd done. Carter stood and started pacing again. We staged it, planted weapons near the unarmed bodies, positioned them to look like they'd been fighting, took photos that supported Morrison's narrative, and we swore to each other that we'd never speak about what really happened, that we'd take the official story to our graves. Morrison filed his report, said we'd engaged a high-value target and his bodyguards, said all 11 were enemy combatants, said it was a textbook operation, and nobody questioned it. Why would they? We were experienced soldiers, Morrison was a respected officer, and this was Mosul. Civilian casualties happened. The fact that we'd perfectly documented it as a legitimate engagement just proved we'd done everything right. We flew home a week later. Heroes, combat veterans who'd completed a successful deployment. Nobody knew that 3 of the 11 people we'd killed were children. Nobody knew that we'd murdered a family to cover up a badly planned operation. Carter collapsed back into his chair, emotionally spent. And now half of us are dead. Jackson couldn't live with it. Left a note saying he saw those children every night. Martinez drove into a bridge abutment at high speed, no braking, no attempt to avoid it. Williams drank until his liver failed because that was slower than putting a gun in his mouth but accomplished the same thing. The guilt is killing us, Jason. Literally killing us. And I can't keep carrying it. Can't keep pretending I'm fine when I see those faces every time I close my eyes. The little girl especially. She was maybe 8 years old, hiding behind her mother, and I shot them both. The confession hung in the air between us, terrible and undeniable. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why tonight? Carter pulled out his phone, showed me a news article. The headline read, Iraqi government investigates alleged U.S. war crime in Mosul. Someone talked. An Iraqi who'd been in the building that night, hiding in another room. He survived. And 7 years later, he's finally come forward with his version of what happened. Says American soldiers massacred his family. Says 3 of the dead were his children. My blood ran cold. The investigation is preliminary. They don't have our names yet. Morrison filed the report under operational security protocols. But they're asking the U.S. military to provide documentation. And if they look closely at Morrison's report, if they examine the evidence photos we staged, if they interview any of us, they'll know we lied. They'll know it was a war crime, and we'll all face prosecution. Exactly. So we have a choice to make. The same choice Morrison gave us 7 years ago, but inverted. Do we maintain the lie, hope the investigation goes nowhere, and keep carrying this guilt until it kills us like it killed Jackson and Martinez and Williams? Or do we tell the truth, face the consequences, and maybe finally find some kind of peace? I stood and walked to his small window, looking out at the street-level view of passing feet. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a basement apartment contained 2 men wrestling with whether to confess to killing children. If we confess, our lives are over, I said. Prison, dishonor, our families learning what we did. Everything we've built since Iraq collapses. If we don't confess, we're already dead. Just taking longer to die than Jackson did. Is that really better? I thought about my wife upstairs in our bed, about the job I'd built, the quiet life I'd constructed on a foundation of lies and repression, about what would happen if the truth came out. What about Torres? I asked. The third survivor. Does he know about this? I called him before I called you. He's on his way. Should be here any minute. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Carter let in Miguel Torres, who looked only marginally better than Carter did. Torres nodded at me, his expression grim. So we're really doing this, Torres said, sitting down. Finally talking about Mosul. The Iraqi survivor is forcing our hand, Carter explained. Either we get ahead of it by confessing, or we wait for the investigation to expose us. There's a third option, Torres said. We corroborate each other's stories. Stick to Morrison's version. There were 11 combatants. We engaged legitimately. The Iraqi survivor is lying or mistaken. It's his word against ours and the official documentation. Can you live with that? Carter asked. Can you spend the rest of your life defending the murder of 3 children as legitimate combat? Because I can't. I've tried for 7 years and it's killing me. And confessing helps how? Those kids are still dead. Confessing doesn't bring them back. It just destroys us too. Torres's voice was bitter. We've already lost Jackson, Martinez and Williams to guilt. You want to make sure the last 3 of us end up in prison or dead too? I want to stop lying. Carter was shouting now. I want to acknowledge what we did instead of hiding from it. I want those children's deaths to be properly recorded instead of being classified as enemy combatants. Don't their families deserve that much? Their families deserved for us not to kill them in the first place. Torres shot back. But we did. We made that choice. And now we have to live with it. Confessing doesn't undo the crime. It just makes us feel better while destroying everyone around us. What about Morrison? I asked. He gave the order to engage. He staged the scene. He filed the false report. He's more culpable than any of us. Morrison retired last year, Carter said, living in Florida, probably sleeping fine at night while we tear ourselves apart with guilt. So we take him down with us, Torres said. If we're confessing, we make sure Morrison faces the worst of it. He was in command. He made the call. Doesn't change what we did, Carter replied. Doesn't change that we pulled the triggers. Morrison didn't force us to shoot children. We did that ourselves. For the next hours, we argued in circles. Torres advocating for maintaining the lie, protecting ourselves, honoring the oath we'd made. Carter insisting we had to confess, face consequences, acknowledge the truth. Me stuck between them, seeing both sides, unable to commit to either path. Let me ask you something, I finally said. If we confess, if we face prosecution in prison and public disgrace, does that actually help anyone? Does it bring those children back? Does it help their families? Or does it just make us feel like we've done some kind of penance? Carter thought about that. Maybe it's selfish. Maybe confessing is just about easing our own guilt. But at least it's honest. At least we'd be acknowledging what we did instead of hiding behind Morrison's lies. And what about the investigation? Torres asked. If we confess, we hand them everything. But if we stay silent, maybe it goes nowhere. Maybe the Iraqi survivor doesn't have enough evidence. Maybe we ride it out. And if the investigation uncovers the truth anyway, if they expose us before we have a chance to come forward voluntarily, Carter challenged, then we're cowards twice over. Cowards for committing the crime and cowards for refusing to own it. My phone buzzed. A text from my wife. Everything okay? You've been gone for hours. I looked at that text and thought about explaining to her what I was about to do. Thought about her face when she learned I'd killed children in Mosul. Thought about whether our marriage could survive that revelation. I need more time, I said. I need to think about this. Consider all the angles. This isn't a decision we can make tonight in Carter's basement while we're emotional and scared. We don't have time, Carter said. The investigation is moving forward. We need to decide, confess now while we can control the narrative, or stay silent and hope we're never exposed. Then give me 24 hours. Let me sleep on it. Let me think clearly without the pressure of making an immediate choice. Torres nodded. I agree. This is too big to decide right now. We meet tomorrow night, same place, and we make a final decision together. Carter looked like he wanted to argue but finally agreed. 24 hours. But that's it. I can't carry this anymore. With or without you two, I'm making a choice tomorrow. I drove home as the sun was rising, my mind churning through everything Carter had said. The confession, the investigation, the choice between maintaining a lie or facing terrible consequences. My wife was awake when I got home, making coffee, worried about where I'd been all night. Everything okay? She asked. No, I said honestly. Everything's not okay, but I can't talk about it yet. I need to figure some things out first. She didn't push, just held me while I tried not to fall apart. Over the next 24 hours, I did what I should have done 7 years ago. I researched what had actually happened that night, used my access to military databases to pull up the original reports, read Morrison's account of the engagement, looked at the photos we'd staged, and I saw it with clear eyes for the first time, saw how obviously the weapons had been planted, saw how the blood patterns didn't match combat engagement, saw how the bodies of the children had been positioned to look threatening, but just looked tragic. Any competent investigation would see through our lies immediately. The question wasn't whether we'd committed a war crime. The question was whether that crime would ever be investigated. I also found the Iraqi survivor's testimony. His name was Karim Hassan. He'd lost his wife, 3 children, brother, mother, and 3 other family members in our raid. He'd been in another room, hiding, had heard the gunfire and the screams, and had emerged to find everyone dead. For 7 years he'd been silent, traumatized, afraid of speaking out. But now he was demanding accountability, demanding that the world know his family weren't terrorists but civilians caught in American crossfire. Reading his testimony, seeing his pain, I couldn't maintain the lie anymore. Couldn't pretend those 11 people had been legitimate targets. Couldn't hide behind Morrison's false report. I met Carter and Torres the next night. We sat in that same basement apartment, 3 men whose lives were about to change irrevocably. I'm confessing, Carter said immediately. With or without you two, I've already drafted a statement. I'm sending it to the military, to the Iraqi government, to journalists. I'm telling the truth about what happened that night, and destroying your life in the process, Torres said. Destroying all our lives, because the moment you confess, they'll come after all of us. Then confess with me. At least then we face it together. At least then we control the narrative instead of being exposed. They both looked at me. The deciding vote. I've been thinking about Jackson, I said quietly. About why he killed himself. He left a note saying he couldn't live with what we'd done, couldn't keep pretending it was justified. And I think he was braver than us, because he at least admitted it to himself, even if he couldn't face the consequences. So you're confessing? Carter asked. I'm acknowledging the truth. Whether that means public confession or just private acknowledgement, I don't know yet. But I can't keep lying. Can't keep pretending those were legitimate kills. Can't keep hiding behind Morrison's false report. That's not an answer, Torres said. We need a decision. Confess or stay silent. We need to be united. United in what? In maintaining a lie that's killing us? Jackson's dead. Martinez is dead. Williams is dead. How many more of us have to die before we admit the lie isn't worth protecting? Torres stood, started pacing like Carter had the night before. You know what happens if we confess? We go to prison. Military prison, maybe federal prison. War crimes, murder, conspiracy. We're looking at life sentences. Our families will be destroyed. Our names will be synonymous with atrocities. Everything we've done since Iraq will be erased by this one night. And if we stay silent, we become Jackson. We become Martinez. We become Williams. Dead from guilt we can't process because we won't acknowledge what we did. Carter's voice was steady now, resolved. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison having told the truth than die free having maintained a lie. What about Morrison? I asked. If we're doing this, we make sure he goes down too. We don't let him escape consequences while we face them. Agreed, Carter said. My statement names Morrison as the commanding officer who gave the order and orchestrated the cover-up. If we're facing justice, so is he. Torres sat back down, his face showing the weight of 7 years of suppressed trauma. If we do this, if we really do this, there's no going back. The moment we confess, our lives are over. Everything changes. Everything already changed 7 years ago in that room in Mosul, I said. We've just been pretending otherwise. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. Torres was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we do this together. We confess. We face the consequences. We finally tell the truth about what happened that night. Carter pulled out 3 copies of the statement he'd written. We read through it together, made revisions, ensured every detail was accurate. It was a complete confession. Names, dates, exact sequence of events, the children we'd killed, the weapons we'd planted, the lies we'd told. Once we send this, there's no taking it back, Carter said. Then we better be sure, Torres replied. We were sure. Or as sure as 3 broken men could be about destroying their lives to finally acknowledge a terrible truth. We sent the statements simultaneously. To the Department of Defense, to the Iraqi government, to multiple journalists, to the same investigators who were already looking into Karim Hassan's claims. Then we waited. The response came faster than expected. Within 48 hours, military investigators were at our doors. We were all taken into custody. Morrison was arrested in Florida. The story broke in the media. American soldiers confessing to war crimes in Mosul. The investigation confirmed everything we'd said. Forensic analysis of the original photos showed the planted weapons. Ballistics didn't match Morrison's report. The evidence we'd staged 7 years ago fell apart under scrutiny. We were formally charged. Murder, conspiracy, false official statements. Morrison faced additional charges for abuse of authority and orchestrating the cover-up. The trial took months. We all pled guilty, accepted responsibility, faced Karim Hassan in court, and apologized for killing his family. Apologized for lying about it for 7 years. Apologized for classifying his children as enemy combatants to cover our crime. He didn't forgive us, said apologies couldn't bring back his family, but he thanked us for finally telling the truth, for finally acknowledging that his loved ones were innocent victims, not terrorists. We were sentenced. Carter got 25 years. Torres got 23. I got 25. Morrison got 35. All of us in military prison, dishonorable discharges, total forfeiture of benefits. My wife divorced me. Can't blame her. I'd hidden this from her for 7 years, then destroyed our life by confessing. Torres's family stood by him but struggled with the shame. Carter's parents stopped speaking to him. We'd known this was the cost, had accepted it when we made the decision to confess. I'm writing this from Leavenworth, 5 years into my sentence. Carter and Torres are here too. We see each other occasionally, though military prisoners aren't encouraged to fraternize. Was it worth it? I don't know. Those children are still dead. Kareem Hassan still grieves his family. Our confession didn't undo the crime. But Jackson, Martinez, and Williams died carrying guilt they couldn't acknowledge, died believing the lie because they couldn't face the truth. We're facing the truth, paying for what we did, acknowledging that we murdered children and tried to cover it up. It doesn't bring them back, doesn't make us good people, doesn't erase the crime, but at least it's honest. At least those 3 children whose names I now know, whose faces I see every day, whose deaths I'm finally properly atoning for, are acknowledged as victims rather than enemy combatants. At least their father got some measure of truth and justice, even if it came 7 years too late, and at least I'm not pretending anymore. Not hiding behind Morrison's lies, not slowly dying from suppressed guilt like my brothers did. I'm in prison for murder. That's what I deserve. That's what justice looks like for what I did in Mosul. And somehow, despite everything, I sleep better now than I have in 7 years, because the truth, however terrible, is lighter than the lie.